I still remember the day Ethan proposed, as vividly as if it happened yesterday. I was 29, living the dream as an event planner, and Ethan seemed like the dream. He was charming in the way everyone notices, successful, confident, the kind of man who walked into a room and made you feel like everything would be okay. We'd been dating for a little over 2 years, and while there had been moments, tiny, almost imperceptible moments, where I felt something wasn't quite right, I told myself those feelings were just jitters. After all, no one is perfect. Ethan's proposal was the kind of grand gesture you see in movies. My family had gathered for a summer barbecue, laughter and the smell of grilled food filling the air. He'd excused himself during dessert, disappearing for just long enough to make me wonder if something was wrong. When he returned, it was with a small velvet box in hand. He dropped to one knee, his voice steady but his eyes brimming with emotion. "Olivia," he said, "you make me want to be a better man. Will you marry me?" The cheers were deafening. My mom cried openly, clutching my dad's arm, and even my sister, who'd always teased Ethan, gave him an approving nod. It was everything I thought I wanted, yet I hesitated, just for a second. I remember Ethan's expression, his smile faltering ever so slightly as if he could sense my pause. But then I said yes. How could I not? Everyone around me was so happy, so sure, and I convinced myself that this was my happily ever after. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of planning. Ethan and I threw ourselves into preparing for what I thought would be the most important day of our lives. At first, it was exciting. Venues, colors, cake tastings, every decision felt like a step closer to our future. But slowly, cracks began to appear. They weren't obvious to anyone else, just little things that gnawed at me in quiet moments. Ethan wanted control over everything. The guest list had to include certain people from his work, even though I'd never met them. When I suggested a smaller, more intimate wedding, he dismissed the idea, saying it would reflect poorly on his image. Then there were the comments. Subtle, almost imperceptible, but sharp enough to leave marks. "Are you sure you want to wear your hair like that for the photos?" Or, "I don't think that's really your color, Liv." It wasn't just about the wedding. He'd started offering suggestions about my career too, questioning why I wanted to take on a high-profile client that would mean longer hours. "You don't need the stress," he'd said with a smile that felt more patronizing than supportive. Sophia, my best friend, noticed the change in me. "You've been quiet lately," she remarked one evening over wine. When I brushed it off, she pressed, "Liv, I'm serious. Are you happy?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell her that everything was perfect, that Ethan and I were building something beautiful. But instead, I found myself saying, "It's just the stress of planning. You know how it is." Sophia didn't look convinced, and for the first time, I wasn't either. The turning point came about a month before the wedding. I was using Ethan's laptop to finalize some seating arrangements when a notification popped up on his screen. It was a message from a coworker, one I'd met briefly at a company event. The preview read, "Can't stop thinking about last night." My heart sank. I knew I shouldn't, but I clicked on it. What I found were weeks of flirtatious messages, plans to meet for drinks, even photos exchanged late at night. When I confronted Ethan, he didn't deny it. Instead, he laughed, as if I'd caught him in some harmless prank. "Liv, it's nothing," he said. "She's just a friend. You're overreacting." Overreacting. The word stung. For years, I'd let Ethan's words shape how I saw myself. He'd made me doubt my instincts, question my worth. And now, here I was, wondering if maybe he was right. Maybe I was being paranoid. But deep down, I knew the truth. The morning of the wedding arrived, and with it came a wave of dread I couldn't shake. My dreams the night before had been vivid, filled with images of me trapped in a house with no doors, no windows, just endless walls closing in. I woke up gasping for air, and for the first time I let myself ask the question I'd been avoiding for months. Was this what I wanted? Sophia came to see me as I was getting ready. She took one look at me and said, "You don't have to do this." Her words hung in the air like a lifeline. "It's not too late, Liv. You deserve to be happy." Tears welled up in my eyes. But everyone, my family, Ethan, I trailed off, the weight of expectations pressing down on me. Sophia grabbed my hands. "The people who love you will understand, and the ones who don't, they don't matter." As I walked down the aisle, the garden around me blurred into a haze of colors and sounds. My eyes locked on Ethan, standing at the altar with that same confident smile. For a moment, I felt like I was watching someone else's life. Then, as I reached him and he took my hands, reality hit me like a wave. This was my life, my choice, and I couldn't do it. When the officiant asked me if I would take Ethan to be my husband, I looked into his eyes and said, "I can't." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ethan's smile vanished, replaced by a look of shock and anger. "What are you doing?" he hissed under his breath. I turned to the guests, my voice trembling but firm. "I'm so sorry," I said. But I can't go through with this. I've spent so much time trying to make everyone else happy, and I forgot to ask myself if I was happy. The silence was deafening. My mother's face was a mix of disappointment and concern, while Sophia looked at me with pride. Ethan, however, wasn't as composed. "You're humiliating me," he snapped. I met his gaze, my voice steady now. "I'd rather disappoint you today than betray myself for a lifetime." I walked away from the altar, the weight of years of doubt and fear lifting with each step. Tears streamed down my face, but for the first time in months, I felt free. Later, as I sat with my mother and explained everything, the messages, the controlling behavior, the way I'd lost myself, she listened quietly. When I finished, she hugged me and said, "I just want you to be happy." In the weeks that followed, I began to rebuild. I threw myself into work, started therapy, and reconnected with friends I'd drifted away from. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again. One day, while sitting in a cafe, I caught the eye of someone across the room. He smiled, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope. But whether or not it turned into something didn't matter. What mattered was that I'd finally learned to listen to my own voice, and it was telling me I was going to be okay. Months later, I stood in front of a group of women at a local support group sharing my story. Each nod and understanding glance reminded me that I wasn't alone. My experience wasn't unique, and that was both heartbreaking and empowering. I ended my story with the same words Sophia had said to me: "The people who love you will understand, and the ones who don't, they don't matter." It wasn't the ending I'd imagined when Ethan proposed, but it was the beginning of something better, a life where I chose myself. And that, I realized, was the happiest ending I could ever hope for.